Hey, Justin, it's great connecting with you. And for anyone out there taking the time to listen to this, thank you. And I'm not calling this a podcast, but I'm calling this a series of interviews with really interesting and impactful leaders I've gotten to know throughout my career. And today, Justin Nassiri, who's been really helpful for me in ways that we'll talk about a little bit later. But by way of brief introduction, Justin's a fellow. uh, Justin's very much an underachiever, if you can tell from his background. Naval Academy graduate, class of 2002, served in submarines, which is a pretty elite group of operators. Subsequently got his MBA from Stanford in 2009. And since that time has been a serial entrepreneur. And today, how I got to know Justin is he leads a team, does some amazing things to help other leaders out there to tell their story through LinkedIn. It's an organization that's called Executive Presence, and we could talk about that a little bit more. But Justin, thanks again for your time today. I'm able to start with high-level introduction that I just made. What I'd like to do is start with the early foundation. But tell us a little bit more about growing up, and as a start to your story, then takes you to the Naval Academy and beyond. I'm curious about your early days.
Well, thanks for having me on. I grew up Southern California, had an older brother, pretty normal upbringing in Southern California in Orange County. And my brother decided to go to the Naval Academy, had never even heard of it. And when I went out to visit him for a weekend, kind of fell in love with the place as well. And so, yeah, really that early foundation that well, let me say in high school, I think early on was drawn to leadership, and that took for me the form of drum major of the marching band and president of the Model United Nations, and kind of seeking out those leadership opportunities. But I imagine similar to you, when you go to the Naval Academy, that is such a focus of the institution, is training people to be leaders, which has the byproduct of seeing thousands of examples of different people leading and seeing which styles you might want to emulate and which ones you might want to avoid. But I think that was hugely impactful, of just having that expectation that in 4 years you are going to be leading men and women in the military, and giving you tremendous opportunity to take on way more responsibility than I would have had anywhere else. And so that taught me a lot about, specific things that I think I carry through today as a leader.
I'm interested in you mentioned your brother as being the key influence for you to discover what the Naval Academy was and to really generate your interest in it. For me, it was the superintendent of my high school who saw something in me, and I still give him a lot of credit for putting me on a path that took me on a very different trajectory than I might have otherwise. So it sounds like your brother was the main guy. Was there anyone else that you could think of who influenced you early on, whether it's the Naval Academy or otherwise, to go headfirst into leadership crucible the Naval Academy is?
I'll call it out. There was a high school guidance counselor, and I don't know what Nancy Gross, I don't know what Nancy picked up on, but she pulled me aside, must have been my senior year. And because my brother and I were back to back throughout high school, and then eventually the Naval Academy. And he is an underachiever as well. He was a Rhodes Scholar and went to Harvard Medical School, equally successful at high school. But she pulled me apart, and she just said, Justin, the Naval Academy is a really big place. You can go there, even though your brother's there, you can go there and forge your own path, which not only proved to be true, we had very different experiences there, but I think I needed to hear that, to think that I could go to some place and be my own person and find my own way, while having someone I cared about deeply there, but also find my unique way there. And so that was a pretty big influence in allowing me to say, yeah, I can go there too.
You mentioned seeking out leadership opportunities in high school. So you already sound like had a proclivity to do that. Naval Academy is up in the game when it comes to that, because you are your peer group there are all people who did very similar things from their time at high school. I'm curious about your foundation at the academy. Like, what were the key learnings, maybe the surprises that you encountered in what you learned or about yourself as a leader there that maybe were different or built upon what you learned in high school?
Yeah, I think because I'm coming up on 25 years out of the Naval Academy, which is wild. And I think two that really stick with me is, and this might be a cliche for people that serve like us, but I think that sense of message to Garcia, or I think of it in terms of breaking through walls. I think it's such a great attribute of a leader, and especially an entrepreneur, is the tenacity to find a way and to figure it out and to deal with ambiguity and overcome obstacles, and just that relentlessness. And I interviewed a client this week, and she was telling me, her company went from like 100 million in revenue to 500 million, and then down to like 50 million. And she just said,
Ooh.
you just have to keep going. And I look back at the Naval Academy. I'm like, yeah, I learned there how to just be relentless and not give up and not let any sort of setback cause me to quit. So I think that's one of the two big ones. And then the second one, you have so many examples of people leading, and the way that your group is structured around a squad and a company, like you're always serving under someone. But we would
Mm-hmm.
always eat our meals together in King Hall. You'd have 4,000 students eating there, and the senior person at each table of 12 people, they got to determine how you would eat. And there were basically two styles. There was Navy style, which is, I'm the senior person. You're going to serve me food first, and we're going to pass it around the table, and maybe the last guy gets something. And then there was Marine Corps style, which the most senior person was the last person to eat. And those, although I was not a Marine, those were the midshipmen that I looked up to. I just thought, like, what an incredible example of something as fundamental of the breakfast you're eating or the lunch or the
Mm-hmm.
dinner. I'm going to make sure that every single person is taken care of before I eat. And I thought that example of taking care of your people, and this mindset that if you just look after your people, everything good will follow. That was this, not just something I learned, but this felt sense of seeing leaders where I'm like, this sets them apart. That willingness to sacrifice and not view leadership as an entitlement or as something that gives me, rank has its privilege. Like the people who are the opposite of, like, as the leader, I'm probably going to have it the worst, and I'm going to work the hardest and stay up the latest and get fed last. That really had a lasting influence on how I view teams.
Yeah, there's a few phrases you brought up there that come to mind for me in no particular order. One is message to Garcia, which is drilled in our heads. I'm curious, should we take a minute to describe that, or should we put that as a call out
I think
there
it's
for
a great
people to
call out. I think
come
that
to
the
us? I'm late
synopsis.
there and toss this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Message to Garcia. It's a great one for someone to take away, because the moral of the story is like the story of one person who, with very little instruction and no assistance, accomplished a very challenging mission. And I think it's a nice rite of passage for anyone who's interested in that to track down that story and read it, because that's part of what it is like finding your way.
Yeah. Well, not infrequently, some of the young new talent that's coming into executive search, one of the questions they have for me is, what are some of the keys to success? And that's one of my common replies is message to Garcia. And they ask, what is that? And we say, come back to me in 2 days and tell me.
That's priceless. Yeah.
But resilience, I think resilience is so key. And so many of the leaders at ISS, and my job as an executive recruiter, this notion that leaders eat last. And along with that is a couple of different aspects of leadership. It has its privileges, but its responsibilities.
Mhm.
And I think those good leaders are the ones that take both of those equally to heart, and not necessarily just the the privileges without the responsibilities, for sure. So you go to the Naval Academy. There's a lot of different things you can do, a lot of different options. As you spent your time there, what things did you consider? Why did you choose the submarine corps? And yeah, I'm curious what drove you to that decision.
I think it's probably similar to how I ended up at Stanford and other things. Because of the way the academy is structured and you're around all these other people who are also going to the Navy, you run into a lot of people and eat alongside a lot of people. And I found that the guys that were going for submarines tended to seem pretty smart. They tended to have a pretty cynical sense of humor, and they like to get stuff done. And that was, when I went on submarines and during my summer internship, that was true. It was like, it just kind of felt like a community, like that South Park style sense of humor, and people who were smart but not I don't know, trying to find the fastest way from point A to B is kind of how I experienced them. And it just felt like, yeah,
Okay.
this is where I fit in, this is where I want to go. And it also, similar to the academy, it felt like a challenge. I'm like, I gotta audition to do this, I got to go through all these exams, and then I'll get a bonus, albeit it's 10 grand at the time, but in the military, that felt like infinity billion
At the
dollars.
time, that felt like a lot of money,
Yeah, it
didn't
felt
it?
like a lot of money. And
Yeah.
but the rigor of it was really appealing.
Yeah. Well, I can appreciate that. And so you did 5 years
Yep.
active duty, if
Yep.
I do the math right. Tell us a little bit high level, like what your commands were. And then I'm curious about two things. One is building on the foundation that you developed at the Naval Academy. What what leadership lessons were reinforced, and what maybe net new leadership lessons or skills did you develop? And then curious about your decision to make a career move and go to business school.
Yeah.
Like what drove that?
Yeah, man. And I'll give a quick shout out. Even at the Naval Academy, there were two really influential leaders that I worked underneath. One was my company officer, Dave Richardson. He was a surface warfare officer who's still in, and I was just trading notes with him on LinkedIn. But such a gifted leader, and I learned a lot from him. But one of the tactics that I picked up is he kind of tapped to be company commander one of the guys in our company that we largely viewed as a goofball and kind of just like a jokester. And I remember him saying, he's like, yeah, I learned in the surface fleet that when you have someone who might be challenging, like you got to give them a challenge. And he did. And this guy, Chris Gall, turned out to be such an incredible company leader, company commander. But because Dave saw something in him and thrust this responsibility on him he might not otherwise have chosen for himself. And that stuck with me, is like, it's not like, I think a great leader can see things in people they don't see in themselves, and they can also evoke from them better behavior, often by giving responsibility, not avoiding and giving it to someone who you view as more responsible. So that was one. And then my last year at the academy, I served on the brigade staff. It's like the top 8 leaders at the school. And the biggest perk of that is I worked underneath our commandant, who was General John Allen, who Marine Corps, probably the best officer I've ever seen. And I just, I remember my job, I sat in on all the performance adjudications. So someone gets in trouble in a big way, I would sit in on that. And I just started taking notes. I wish I still had this notebook. I just started taking notes because when General John Allen would talk, he just spoke with such conviction about the power of integrity and doing the right thing and that moral fiber. He was like the type of guy where I'm like, I can see how this man could motivate you to run into fire or run into a burning building. And the role that integrity and trustability plays in that, of when you give these orders, that people trust you, they know in your core who you are. And so before even leaving the academy, those were such powerful examples. I'm so grateful to have served alongside and learned from them before stepping foot even on my first ship.
there's so many things packed into that response, which is great. One of them that stands out to me is this notion that the company officer put someone in a role that by all accounts a lot of people didn't think was ready for it. And if one of my observations in the private sector, and we'll be a good segue to that for you here shortly, is I feel like there's a tendency for risk aversion for leaders to want to feel 100% sure someone's ready for the job before they give them the responsibility. And my observation is that given the opportunity and people will be motivated and the support, scaffolding, if you will, most people will rise to the occasion, even if they're not necessarily ready for it. And to me, I've observed, and that seems like much more an effective way to accelerate the growth of an organization as opposed to waiting for perfect.
Yep.
And I'm just curious about your observations on that. Maybe I'm skipping ahead, whether it was in the Navy or even subsequent to that, things that you've seen with your teams or even your clients.
I'm a little biased because, all of my career has been early stage companies and small businesses and entrepreneurship. And that to me necessitates entrusting people and very often kind of pushing people past their comfort zone. And especially if the team member comes from a more established organization. And I think I've gotten better in the hiring process of making that clear of like, if you're looking or needing direction, this isn't the right spot for you. Like, this is the goal. This is what we're going after. Like, figure it out. Like, we'll try to help you as well. But like, the ambiguity that we're all dealing with necessitates you stepping up and doing and figuring out and doing your own message to Garcia. And
I was just going to say that same thing. Message to Garcia keeps coming back.
It does.
That's great.
And so to me, having built now 3 organizations from scratch, it really has been every step of the way is like getting people and hopefully making them feel trusted to go after something. And I think that, that the muscle I've had to build, I'm not sure if I had this in the military, was letting them make mistakes. I think the consequences are far lower in the private sector, but allowing them to pursue something and having something in the back of mind, it's probably similar. I'm guessing to what you and I would relate to with parenting is like, oh, I've seen this play out 50 times and I know this is not going to work out well, but I have to let them have natural consequences. And I have to let them, I can tell them all day long, but they have to experience this. And that is part of investing in someone as a leader is I'm willing to have some failure. I'm willing to lose clients or lose a team member or lose money, but that's an investment in them getting their own gut feel for the right way to lead and the right way to show up.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the aspect of raising kids. And one of the analogies I use with some of the up and coming principals and partners in my business, many of whom did not have the benefit like I did of being in a crucible of leadership that I chose, where I was thrust into positions where I had to do this stuff. I've found in the private sector a lot of times those who are thrust in leadership positions are the best at what they do, but they haven't had any formal training. So the analogy I use is when you get to the point where you need to be commercially successful, you can leverage your experience to go originate business, develop your own book of business. If you're doing every single aspect of the project that you're doing, in our case, leading an executive search, you're not going to have time for all of those, and you're not going to develop that next generation. So I encourage people, and it's hard for them to do. Like they may not lose a client, but they may have a very uncomfortable client call because the analogy I use, I'll get to my point, is if you're sitting in the right seat as you're teaching your 16-year-old or 15-year-old to drive, there's a point in time where you have to resist telling them what to do at every single moment and reaching over and grabbing the wheel. There's a point in time you're not going to be there anymore. And I use that analogy with them, and I think it resonates after a while, because sometimes they'll say, boy, they just didn't know how to present on the call. something wasn't right. We're like, well, you have to let them learn.
Yeah.
Because if you step in, they're not going to learn. It's not going to free you up to go do what you have to do to grow your business. And I think it's a very apt analogy.
And I love also the number of times where in my bones, I know what the right answer is. And then the person does something completely different and it works. And so that's also a lesson for me too, is like, I can be beyond convicted that this is the right thing, but there's a million ways to do things. And like, there's a lot of times that hopefully I'm not vocalizing it to the person, but I'm like eating my own words to myself of like, wow, they did it. They did it differently than me, but it worked. And it's a good reminder to me of like, I know the way that works for me, but people have to find the way that works for them.
Well, speaking of finding your way, I want to go back a little bit high level to that inflection point. You decided for whatever reason, I'm going to go to business school, or I'm going to go to Stanford, and then I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. How much of that was like the vision that you had, or once again, maybe there are people who had done something similar, who influenced you, or something I haven't thought of? Like, what were the influences that drove you down that path?
So the first decision to go to business school was 100% masterminded and set on examples. And then the second decision was not planned out at all, the entrepreneurship one. So when I was in subs, I did meet, some officers who were getting out and going to a top tier business school. And so it planted the seed and got me going of like, oh, if I like,
Same for me.
yeah, right. Like if I like the leadership side of things, but I don't want to be running a nuclear reactor the rest of my life, it has something to do with business. So go to business school and figure that out. And that definitely was true. So, there were a lot of veterans on the way who read my essays and answered my questions and gave me books to read. And so that felt so, that was like a long-term plan that went exactly as planned. And I wrote my essays for business school, telling what I knew from other submarine guys was, I want to go to business school. I want to get the academic experience. Then I want to go to a top tier consulting firm. I want to get that experience, and then I'll figure out what to do. And that's what I plan to do.
Sounds familiar.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I pulled it off. I did my internship with McKinsey in New York, got an offer, and was done. And then my start date, this is 2009. I wasn't going to start until January of the following year. I had essentially, 7-8 months completely on my own. And I used that time, and I used my $30,000 signing bonus to tinker with an idea, and tinkered and found myself working 80, 90-hour weeks on a side project that was just creating something new. And I remember I had so much reservations, but I remember meeting with another Stanford submarine guy, Roy Gilbert, and I remember asking him, I'm like, look, man, I have fallen in love with the act of creating and starting something new, such that I'm fine being unemployed, but I want to give this a go. And I really agonized over going back to McKinsey and saying, hey, I gave, in my view, it was like, I gave you my word I was going to start, and now I want to rescind on my offer, which they didn't give two craps about. But that was,
yeah, you didn't. How could you have known that?
yeah,
Right. I mean, it's
exactly.
your first like real job, as they say, out of the military.
But that massive career leap couldn't have been more opposite than the decision to go to business school, because it wasn't following someone else's path. It wasn't based on hundreds of informational interviews. It was more of like, for some reason, it's 9:00 on a Friday night, and I'm still working, even though this isn't my job, like paying attention to that energy of like, whatever this is, I want more of this, because I don't think I'm going to find that somewhere else.
So I would definitely want to get here relatively quickly to executive presence and the punchline and what you're doing today, but give me a quick whistle stop tour of that first venture, the things you've done, the key lessons, and how it culminated in founding executive presence.
Yeah, man, weeks after I told McKinsey no, and they made me pay my 30 grand back immediately. I got a round of funding from Eric Schmidt from Google's. He had a small fund. I picked up funding from him.
Oh,
I love. I didn't know that was waiting on the other side of turning down the offer, but that came through and raised about 3 million in capital for a marketing technology company. And that was the startup roller coaster. That was feeling like a genius and then a moron, multiple times a day, and tons of mistakes. But really learn how to build a product, how to sell. I think probably sales was the biggest thing that I learned, and started to make a niche for myself in the world of marketing, specifically around the role of authenticity in marketing. We
mhm.
did a lot with Instagram and brands, but that was kind of the starting point. I started a second company called Captivate, which led into executive presence. And I, along the way, started a podcast for the military community. But each of these, in retrospect, I was picking up a skill, I was picking up a motion, I was picking up an insight, and that, as I look back on what I'm doing now, it's pretty clear to see in my first startup what I learned that's helping me now, in my second startup, in the podcast. Each of these gave me some nugget or some insight that led to a pivot or led to an idea that ultimately grew. But yeah, I'm happy to go into more detail, but it really was like thousands of mistakes and thousands of conversations, and just kind of starting to build a view of the world and how to build an organization that's worked out for the most part really well.
Well, let's bring it around to what you're doing now. Executive presence sounds like it was a culmination of things. What was the essence of the opportunity that you saw? What was your passion around this? When and how long have you been doing this? Is a good starting point.
Yeah, I started this company 4 years ago. They're announcing it formally next week, but we just made Inc. 5,000 for the fastest 5,000 growing companies in the country. So it's been a
Great.
wild 4 years. I think the insight that's kind of one of the through lines on my career as an entrepreneur is the belief that people trust other people more than marketing, that they trust them more than propaganda or what a company says about themselves, that fundamentally we're wired to overweight the value of relationships in the best possible way. And so, building on that belief, what I realized is that if I could go to people, if I could go to leaders and help them communicate a compelling story, specifically on LinkedIn, that would benefit them and that would benefit their organization in a lot of ways, specifically with funding and hiring and sales and kind of everything you need to be successful in
Hmm.
business. But that insight and that belief was, that would be more effective and higher impact through individual leaders rather than the face of the organization. And pulling back to my podcast days, I'd done 460 interviews. And
Oh wow.
maybe the one thing I learned from 460 interviews is like, man, if you bring curiosity to a conversation with an expert, you can uncover incredible things, which became one of the foundational elements of executive presence, was interviewing leaders and pulling out stories and pulling out insights and helping them make sense of what was going on in their career in a way that would land on a platform like LinkedIn. And so we're evolving past LinkedIn now, but that kernel of an insight came from my first company, and that kernel of an insight on how to do it came from the podcast. And I just share that because oftentimes our careers are not as clean or as linear as we might think. But certainly for me, as
Mhm.
I look back, a lot of lily pads that at the time felt like wandering in the wilderness turned out to be teaching me something I didn't know I would benefit from until years or even a decade later.
It's that resonates with me because I felt the same way. In fact, I was talking to someone about this the other day. Said talk to people all the time about their careers, and you see some that look on paper pretty linear, but even then, I think there's a story uh, that would undercut that assumption, right?
Yeah.
That they're certainly not linear. Tell me, tell us a little bit more about who are the most common uh, customers or clients that you work with. Who what are the archetypes and how have they benefited from? Sounds to me like what you're doing is you're facilitating them to tell their story in a better way. You're empowering them,
Yep.
which is a different type. It's a part of leadership that we've talked about. But you're leading these people who are your clients, and who are the archetypes, and what have you found are the ways that you and your team help them the most?
So right now we're focused on usually growth stage companies and B2B leaders, and we'll typically start with the C-suite just because that's usually who the primary brand ambassador is for an organization. But I think the playbook and the principle is not only true for everyone. I think that this is going to become more true for every professional than it's ever been. And the reason why is I think that we all see the role that relationship and authority and trust is playing right now in history more than any other time. You have kind of peak skepticism in institutions and peak skepticism in organizations. And at the same time, you have AI coming on the scene, which can generate a tremendous amount of extremely high quality written and even video content. And so it's never been easier to push out content. And I see the world through the lens of that necessitates the value of thought leadership. That means that every single human being listening to this podcast, their ability to articulate what they know and what they believe in and what they've learned and where they have authority, that is going to become a defining characteristic of their career, more so than at any point in history. And so that's why, no matter whether you're listening to this and you're the type of client I would work with, I hope your takeaway is this is a time to be vocal. And this is a time to make sense of what you know and to share the stories of who you are and what you believe in and what you learned and failures and mistakes you've made and what you've learned. Like, this is the time. And I think that you benefit from that. First of all, it's just a great thing to do as a human being. Yes, there are a million people further ahead of you that have a lot more authority on everything. Great. But there are an equal number of people behind you. There are people, if you're in college, that haven't gone to college and can learn from your experience. And if you're a junior salesperson, there are a million people who don't have that experience and could benefit from you sharing your expertise and your advice. And I think that a lot of times we self-censor today because we think unless I have 300 million followers on a social platform, no one cares about what I have to say. I would say, like, you have something to say. And the only way to get better at figuring out that story you're going to tell is to start, right? And I bet, if we looked at Jamey's LinkedIn or you looked at his podcast and you rewound the clock by 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, he probably wasn't as good at it as he is now. But that muscle was built up of him withstanding that discomfort of taking a stand publicly in some way, whether that is on LinkedIn or speaking at a conference or doing a podcast or just in some way having the courage to articulate a message that might be half-baked, but to figure out as you go how to get better at it. And I think that the way that LLMs are wired and will continue to work, the value of expertise is going to be more and more prized. So getting out there, getting indexed, getting those repetitions in so that as you build your career, you can share more and have a bigger impact.
Well, I can tell you, as you know, Justin, from personal experience, having worked with you and your team for the better part of 3+ years, it has upped my game. I've developed those muscles quite a bit, become more comfortable. So I appreciate, I've got firsthand experience from seeing how that's worked. As we wrap up, 2 questions. The first one is, as you reflect on your career and where you are now and all the things you've learned through others and your own experiences of leadership, you have a short list of non-negotiables, like the most important leadership attributes that are important to you personally?
I hope it's not a cliche, but if so, it's a cliche for a good reason. I think communication. I think that, the way that I operate is as transparent as possible and trying to be as authentic as possible. And if someone is wired in that way, we can work well together. And if there is any politics or positioning or hedging or projecting, I just know that just does not work for the way that I operate, which is like, we're going to move really fast and I will be as direct and honest as I can possibly be. And I absolutely need that as well, or it just doesn't work. That's definitely
Yeah.
a non-negotiable. And I think a second one is autonomy. Part of that is the startup, but part of that is just my style. Is like, I have no time or interest in micromanaging you or telling you what to do. If you're willing to go full force in a direction and to pop up when you need advice or help and then go back down and figure it out, we can work well together. But I just don't have the time or even the disposition. I'm just not one of those people who's on a day-to-day basis to be, hey, Jamey, how's this going? Tell me about this. It's like, no, I got a lot on my plate. You got a lot on yours. Go full out. Tell me when I can help. And otherwise, I don't want to get in your way. I don't want to muck up what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it is just part of what we learned in Naval Academy in the military, but I hate micromanaging and I don't like being micromanaged. It's just similarly just not in my DNA. And last thing is, how can people find you and get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about how you can help them?
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, I run a company called Executive Presence. The website's executivepresence.io. Contact forums there still go to me as the CEO. So that's one way. A second is on LinkedIn. I have a fairly unique name, Justin Nassiri. That's a great way to follow me and reach out as well. And then also, plays into where we're going as a company. If you go to justinnassiri.com, ton of information there. And we've got a whole strategy about making individuals more discoverable to LLMs and making it clear where your expertise lies, so you can be recommended more by Claude and Cowork or ChatGPT and Grok and all the rest. But if you go to justinnassiri.com, there's a lot of information there as well.
Great. Well, I would encourage anyone listening to go check it out. And Justin, great catching up. I can't wait to next time we have the chance to connect. I'm overdue for a trip out to Denver, so we'll have to get together out there. But in the meantime, thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you, Jamey.